Korean Defense Minister Song Yong-moo and U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis reaffirmed the strength of the two countries' bilateral alliance last week in the U.S. state of Hawaii. They have also committed to keeping up diplomatic efforts towards denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula while defending against North Korean threats. And before we sit down with an expert to talk more about this, let's first connect to Devin Whiting at the News Center for a quick look at what's making the news at this hour. Devin, take us away.
Hi, Jiyoon. Well, South Korea's presidential office has unveiled the list of world leaders visiting the nation for the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. Our chief Blue House correspondent, Moon Jae-in, has more.
Sports often bring a certain degree of drama, and perhaps never more so than when the two Koreas, rivals of over 6 decades, come together under the name of sports in the spirit of the Olympics. And international sporting mega events like the Olympic Games have stretched beyond sports and into the realm of diplomacy, oftentimes summit diplomacy. With South Korean President Moon Jae-in about to kick off his first multilateral diplomacy at home, yes, on the occasion of the 2018 Winter Olympic Games in Pyeongchang, the Blue House on Monday unveiled a list of world leaders visiting the nation next month.
We expect some 2,943 athletes from 92 countries to participate in the Winter Olympics in Pyeongchang next month. This is the largest in size for a Winter Olympics. We're also expecting 26 statesmen from 21 nations to visit South Korea.
President Moon's Liberal government is hoping that the North Olympic participation could mark the beginning of something bigger, of something beyond just sports. So it's certainly a disappointment for the Moon administration to see that just one head of state from the 4 key regional powers will be in attendance, as it would have definitely liked to see a stronger showing to set this diplomatic stage to diffuse tensions on the Korean Peninsula. Nonetheless, the South Korean leader will take this opportunity to both host and flex his diplomatic muscle.
President Moon will host a reception for leaders in the country for the Pyeongchang Olympics on Friday, the 9th of February. He will also hold separate meetings with 14 world leaders, including the presidents of Germany, Slovenia, and the Secretary General of the United Nations.
Despite the shorter list of heads of state-level attendees to the Pyeongchang Games, the summits and meetings the South Korean president will have during the Olympic period will carry significant value and ramifications. There have been reports of a Moon-Abe summit slated for the day of the opening ceremony, the first since a diplomatic row broke out after President Moon threw into doubt the 2015 agreement over Japan's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean women, and the Moon-Pence meeting will also be key as the allies will discuss how to deal with North Korea after the Games. Moon Jae-in, Arirang News, the Blue House.
Meanwhile, the country's ruling party, the government, and the presidential office held their first policy coordination meeting of the year this morning, discussing a range of pending issues from the upcoming Winter Olympics to last week's tragic hospital fire in Miryang. Kim Min-ji reports.
South Korea's ruling party government and presidential office avowed all-out efforts to ensure the successful hosting of the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. This came during their first policy meeting of the year on Monday, where they said the event will be an opportunity to raise Korea's national status and brand value, as well as reduce geopolitical risks. The ruling bloc also called on the opposition to avoid causing political strife regarding North Korea's participation.
It's foolish and regretful to use this prime opportunity to raise the country's status to instead trigger a political conflict. Now is the time for us to lay low and put down our personal interests, and instead ask for the understanding of the people and cooperation from the opposition. Nobody can guarantee what will happen on the peninsula afterwards. That is why we need more effort and sincerity. We believe the Olympics will not just bring economic benefits, but will be a step towards protecting the peninsula from the threat of war.
And to further promote participation, the government is also considering offering temporary visa waiver programs for Chinese visitors as well as Southeast Asian tour groups that have tickets for Olympic events. In addition, drivers will be exempt from paying toll fees on highways in 8 regions of Gangwon-do province during the Olympic period, while all state-operated highways will be free of charge over the Lunar New Year holidays, which fall between February 15th and 18th this year. As for the hospital fire in Pyongyang last week, which killed 39 people, the three sides promised to swiftly find the exact cause of the fire and also agreed to step up safety inspections and take necessary measures to prevent further accidents.
We will make sure there's no negligence in supporting the bereaved families and in dealing with the aftermath of the disaster. From the cause of the fire and who is responsible, and to prevent this from happening again, we will be carrying out a full inspection of the facilities and implement overall safety measures.
They also vowed to roll up their sleeves to ensure that people have peace of mind over the Lunar New Year break.
We will do our best to implement government measures to support the vulnerable, as well as financial support funds to help micro-businesses and low-income workers in the wake of the minimum wage hike before the holiday break.
The three sides also agreed to step up cooperation so that the National Assembly can pass pending bills related to people's livelihoods and safety during the February parliamentary session that's set to kick off on Tuesday. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
It was a good day Monday for investors in Korea's benchmark stock index, the KOSPI. The KOSPI closed at just over 25.98, up 0.9%. It was the third record close in a row. Earlier in the session, it broke through the 2,600 mark for the first time, but later retreated a few points. Experts attribute those gains to strength on Wall Street last week. Also, foreign investors' net buying of local stocks. As for Korea's junior stock index, the tech-heavy KOSDAQ, it rose more than 1.5% to close at 927. I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
South Korea and the United States have wrapped up their latest round of high-level defense talks last week. And while the two Koreas have been interacting for North Korea's participation in the upcoming Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, Seoul and Washington have reaffirmed their ironclad alliance, saying that their ultimate goal is North Korea's denuclearization. And before I sit down with an expert to talk more about this, here's our Oh Jung-hee with more on the meeting.
Amid continued visits and talks between the two Koreas, the defense chiefs of Seoul and Washington met on Friday to reaffirm their ironclad alliance and denuclearization goal. South Korean Defense Minister Song Yong-moo and U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis sat down for talks at U.S. Pacific Command in Hawaii, just 3 months after their last meeting in late October. The U.S. defense chief welcomed the recent resumption of inter-Korean talks, but at the same time, Mattis and his South Korean counterpart confirmed their shared goal of the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. That is, the talks on the Olympics should serve to make North Korea change its path and come to the negotiation table, but not detract from the ultimate goal of denuclearization. Song and Mattis also saw eye to eye on the need to strengthen military readiness against Pyongyang while maintaining strong support for diplomatic solutions.
This threat remains diplomacy-led, backed up with military options available to ensure that our diplomats are understood to be speaking from a position of strength.
Mattis reaffirmed Washington's ironclad security commitment to South Korea, including extended deterrence, and stressed North Korea will face an overwhelming response from the U.S. if the regime ever attacked one of its allies. Song and Mattis also emphasized that any attempt to crack the Seoul-Washington alliance will fail. They agreed to meet face-to-face as often as possible. While there was speculation the talks would set the schedule for the postponed joint military drills Key Resolve and Full Eagle, that was not the case. The exact schedules remain unknown, but the Allies' military authorities are firm that the drills will be held as normal immediately after the Pyeongchang Olympics wrap up in March. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
And to tell us more about the defense talks, Dr. Bong Young-sik, a researcher at the Yonsei Institute for North Korean Studies, joins us in the studio today. So good to see you.
Hi.
All right. So during the talks, the two sides reaffirmed their ironclad commitment and said that North Korea cannot drive a wedge in their alliance. Tell us more about this.
The meeting between the two defense secretaries confirms that the alliance will remain ironclad, and if North Korea will engage in any form of provocation, there will be overwhelming response by both forces. So this is a reiteration of the joint commitment to maintaining peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula before, during, and after the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games.
Now, like you said, the talks came as the two Koreas are busily preparing for the North's participation in the Winter Games. So how do you think North Korea would respond to these talks, as South Korea and the U.S. are committed to continued collaboration aimed at making North Korea change its behavior?
Well, I wouldn't expect that Pyongyang would welcome this announcement, but at the same time, it has been all along very well known to everybody in the world, including the United States, Japan, and South Korea, that North Korea's participation in the Winter Pyeongchang Olympic Games is a kind of a trap. It's a tactic to drive a wedge between the allies. So this is a kind of a gambit being played between Pyongyang and South Korea and the United States on the other side. So there has been a set of preemptive actions taken by not only by South Korean government, that all this progressing into Korean dialogue and South Korea's accommodations of North Korea's participation in Pyeongchang Olympic Games will not violate the existing sanctions, especially the UN Security Council resolutions.
Right.
And the United States government also made it really clear that it wouldn't allow North Korea to hijack the Winter Olympic Games, as well illustrated by the action of the Vice President Mike Pence, who's coming to join the U.S. athletes in Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games. And the coming of the Japanese Prime Minister Abe is also another measure to preemptively undercuts potential attempts by Pyongyang to hijack the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games and drive the wedge between South Korea and its allies. Because the presence of a Prime Minister of Japan and the Vice President of the United States and South Korean President, in the absence of the head of the states from China and Russia, will be another opportunity for these three security partners to confirm that North Korea has to come out without insisting on any preconditions to the settlements of the nuclear crisis it created, premised upon North Korea's promise of denuclearization. There's no bargaining available to North Korea.
Then what can we expect in regards to the joint drills between Seoul and Washington, which has been postponed due to the Olympics?
Well, there are two dates that are mentioned recently. One is the 18th of March.
Okay.
The United States seems to prefer to resume the postponed joint military exercises, the Fall Eagle and the Key Resolve, as soon as possible, immediately after the end of the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games, the Paralympic Games. That's the 18th of March. And another date is the 25th of March, the date proposed by the United Nations, when United Nations passed their recommendations almost unanimously that to ensure the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games as a period of peace for the entire world village. So the date will be decided either of on the 2 days or somewhere between the two dates. But James Mattis, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, made it clear several times that the United States military never pauses the joint military exercises. Postpones are possible, but pausing or significant downscale of the military exercise will not be an option.
Now, are there any chances, though, of us seeing a possible dialogue between the U.S. and North Korea, considering that there has been a thaw between the two Koreas recently?
I wish I would be able to say that there are growing possibility, but I remain rather pessimistic because North Korea holds the key. I mean, it should be from North Korea any moment, if there's be any moment for the bilateral negotiations on denuclearization of North Korea between Pyongyang and Washington. And North Korea has not really demonstrated any tangible sign that it is gravitated toward the idea. It is largely dependent upon who is going to lead the North Korean delegation, the artists and the athletes. Because as well illustrated during the inspection tour led by Ms. Hyun Song-wol last week. Then if the head of the delegation from North Korea does not have any knowledge about nuclear and missile issues or secure the instruction from top leadership, which is the chairman Kim Jong-un, to engage in a negotiation with South Korea, Japan, and the United States, then the head of the delegation would be just a figurehead, only focus on matters related to art performance festivals and sports events.
From the Olympics.
So, yeah,
right?
with
Yes.
even with the presence of the South Korean president, Japanese prime minister, and the vice president from the United States, then there cannot be any meaningful multilateral negotiations on denuclearization. So anybody other than Mr. Choi Ryong-hae, the de facto number 2 man in North Korea, if North Korean delegation will be led by somebody else, like the Kim Jong's sister or anybody else, then you can say that North Korea is not really ready to engage in negotiation on denuclearization. So pay attention to the person who's been leading the North Korean delegation.
Now, we know there wasn't much discussion over the transfer of wartime operational control of South Korean troops from Washington to Seoul during the defense talks, but tell us more about this in the first place.
The transfer of the wartime OPCON, operational control, from the U.S. military in South Korea to South Korean military is now a long history. I mean, the first it was proposed during the Nomuon government in early 2000 as a matter of upgrading the security partnership between Seoul and Pyongyang to become more equal sovereign security partnership and elevate the status and capability of South Korean military equal to U.S. forces stationed in South Korea. But there was time when the bilateral partnership was less than its ideal situation. So when the Nomuon government tossed the idea to Washington during the time of Bush administration, the Bush administration accepted the idea, but in a not less than mostly friendly manner. So then U.S. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld even said that, sir, you are knocking on an open door. So the United States does not station its troops when they are not welcome in the midst of the wave of anti-American sentiment in South Korea was undergoing. So in countering the South Korea's initial proposal to transfer the wartime control, OPCON, to South Korea by the end of 2012, the Bush administration even proposed to give it to South Korean military by the end of 2008. Okay. And the South Korea was far from being prepared to accept that. So the 2012 was set as a target date for the transfer, but the successors of the Nomuon government postponed the scheduled transfer, and in 2014, at the 46th a security consultation meeting in Washington, both governments agreed not to be bound to the set date, but the wartime OPCON will be transferred to South Korea if South Korean military will have satisfied 3 major conditions, which is that the security conditions on the Korean Peninsula will be stable enough, and 2, South Korean military will have acquired sufficient capability to the initial responses to any provocation or emergency situations. And 3, when the nuclear and missile threats of North Korea will be effectively dealt by the South Korea's own military capabilities, including Korea's own missile defense system, KAMD, and the kill chain system, which will preemptively destroy the missile launchers and the artilleries. And 3, the massive retaliation if North Korea is going to attack South Korea. And the initial assessment by the U.S. command of the U.S. forces in South Korea concluded that South Korean military has not acquired these 3 basic preconditions for wartime, OPCON transfer. So, as expressed in the joint statement by Secretary Jim Mattis and the Defense Minister of South Korea, Song Yong-mu, then both sides only agreed to further discuss the timing, the manner of the wartime, OPCON transfer tied to South Korea's defense reform.
But there had been expectations that this OPCON transfer process would be speeded up,
Right, but I mean, there's an agreement that the earlier the better. If the South Korea will emerge as an independent, military power, securing the wartime OPCON to deal with any emergency situations and provocations taking place on the Korean Peninsula. When the day comes, then South Korea will truly become the independent force, being in the so-called driver's seat to take care of the business on the Korean Peninsula. But the intentions or the desire cannot really lead these whole discussions and the process. South Korea has to be able to demonstrate that it has met these three preconditions that it has agreed to met in 2014.
What does the speeding up the transfer process mean for South Korea? Because we know that President Moon has definitely been pushing for this.
One of the reasons is that with securing this wartime OPCON, the South Korean military will be regarded, counted by North Koreans as an independent variable. So far, North Korea has been just passing, South Korea aside, that we are nuclear power states, so we only need to deal with big powers such as China and the United States, so nuclear powers. So South Korea has no, reasons to be included in any talks regarding, the future of the Korean Peninsula, including the substituting the existing armistice agreement for the peace treaty to officially end the Korean War, or the denuclearization of North Korea as a topic of, arms control between, nuclear powers. So once South Korea will have its, wartime, operational control, then North Korea will not be able to just simply dismiss South Korea aside.
What has been the North Korea's response to this OPCON transfer plan? I mean, what impact would this have on inter-Korea relations from here on out?
North Korea seems to be on a kind of a wait-and-see mode. The big target is to make a big deal with the United States to get the recognition by the United States that North Korea is indeed nuclear power state and will be treated as such. So that in exchange for making some concessions on the front of its intercontinental ballistic missile programs and nuclear weapons, North Korea wants to secure economic concessions to resuscitate its dilapidated, destroyed national economy, as well as escape from the diplomatic isolation, so that there will be the day for North Korean leadership to actually begin to realize its touted national policy, which is the simultaneous pursuit of nuclear weapon development and the economic development. It has been quite active on the first leg of this policy, but for the second leg of the policy, which is the elevating the living standard of the North Korean people, the record has been miserable by any standard. So time is against the North Korean leadership to make sure that the people will continuously support the regime and trust the regime's promises. The North Korean reactions to this discussion between Washington and Seoul about the potential transfer of the wartime OPCON will be, try to be exploited by Pyongyang in that context.
Shifting our focus a little bit, I mean, the Pyeongchang Winter Games is quickly approaching, and we know that North Korea is likely to hold a big military parade and events just a day before the opening of the Pyeongchang Winter Games and celebration of its 70th anniversary of its foundation of its military. But South Korean Unification Minister Cho Myung-kyun said that the North's military parade and events is irrelevant to the Winter Games and that its timing is just coincidental. What are your thoughts on this?
It proves once again that North Koreans have the impeccable sense of spoiling somebody else's celebration and birthday, weddings.
Party pooper.
Party pooper, right. And the Minister of Unification, Cho Myung-kyun's explanation is a genuine one, because the change of the date to celebrate the establishment of its armed forces has changed to the 8th of February since 2015. But had the North Korean leadership had a more, how would I say, sophisticated sense of timing and strategic minds, then the leadership might have used it as another bargaining chips towards Seoul and Washington. But judging from the fact that it is going to just go ahead with a military parade on the eve of the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games, I detect that its engagement policy toward the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games is not so sophisticated or well coordinated, because the military parade will just pour the cold water to the any warm image of North Korea that had been created by North Koreans themselves, by sending the inspection team led by iconic personas like the Mr. Hyun Song-wol and whatnot. So what's the point of agreeing to send a massive artists, musicians and athletes, if that warm and kind image of North Korea will be soon spoiled by totally different image of North Korea during the military parade?
It's totally portraying itself as two-sided, right?
Right.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you so much for your insight today.
You're welcome.
And that brings us to the end of our show, but stay tuned to Arirang News for more news updates throughout the day. As always, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye for now.
A village full of exciting sports. It's Pyeongchang. Shall we take a look inside the ice kingdom of sports?